Hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Rini Chaudhary and you're watching Perspective. India is an ancient maritime nation and home to some of the oldest seaports in the world. For millennia, our people have travelled across the vast oceans, carrying with them goods, ideas and religion, and establishing civilizational links crisscrossing across the globe. With its 7,500-kilometre long coastline and 1,200 islands, India has had an enduring maritime tradition and a wide maritime footprint. India's holistic approach towards shaping a global maritime order is reflected in the vision of SAGAR, which stands for Security and Growth for All in the region. In 2018, at the Shangrila Dialogue in Singapore, Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke of the Indo Pacific region as a natural region extending from the shores of East Africa to the Western Pacific, where the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean flow in a seamless continuum. Recently, the 5th edition of the Indo Pacific Regional Dialogue, or the IPRD, was held at Manekshaw Centre in New Delhi with the broad theme Geopolitical Impacts upon Indo-Pacific Maritime Trade and Connectivity. In his keynote address, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar dwelled upon the complexity of security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. This region, said the Vice President, is home to about 2/3 of the global population and contributes over 60% to the global GDP. Half of the world's trade passes through the Indo-Pacific and in the context of India includes 90% of our trade and 80% of our critical freight. India thus has significant stakes in the peace, prosperity and security of this region. We have two veterans of the Indian Navy joining us in conversation today to further our understanding on this theme. I'm delighted to welcome Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, former head of India's Western Naval Command. I'm also delighted to welcome Commodore Anil Jaisingh, Vice President, Indian Maritime Foundation. Thank you, sir, for your time. We'll begin with Mr. Sinha. So, in the light of recent geopolitical developments, how has the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific region evolved?
Thank you for getting me on your show. If you see last about 10 years, gradually the center of activity or a geopolitical changes has shifted from land areas to overseas.
Right.
And that is when the President of United States he mentioned that the weight of the entire activity is going to shift into Indo-Pacific. Why it is so? This is mainly because of the one is the rise of China and relatively catching up with the United States. The intention of the US, intention of the Chinese have been to replace the US from #1 slot in the world. But in between, they have a big country like India, which can really, give them a fair amount of stress. So, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, that the world's trade and not only small trade, if you take the four sort of most advanced and growing economies, China, Japan, South Korea, and India, they all are in this region.
Right.
And they are driving the economy of the world. They can all, if all of them are together, if there is peace and stability, then you will find that the East we may not need the West. And when it was said by Prime Minister Modi that we are looking at act East and not look East, he was quite serious about this entire challenge that was likely to emerge in 2014-15. So the problem is that the little belligerence and aggressiveness of China is causing a lot of security concerns particularly amongst the smaller countries. Number one. Number two, the Chinese Navy, the PLA Navy has grown in size that it has now overtaken the US Navy. And it is only a matter of time that what they're doing in South China Sea, they might just emerge in the Indian Ocean in full force, including the carrier force and the nuclear submarine. And you will find that Pakistan will play its proxy, and therefore security concerns of India will remain and they will only compound. Our maneuvering space is going to shrink, really.
Right. Sir, so you have also dwelled upon the primary security threats and challenges which are being faced by nations today in the Indo-Pacific region. Mr. Singh, India has been playing a very critical role in extending humanitarian aid and disaster relief in the Indo-Pacific region. But it also seeks to establish itself as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific region. How effectively has India been able to translate this particular vision into ground reality?
I think India has been very successful, and I think the actual start point or the real trigger for that was the assistance we gave when the tsunami happened on Boxing Day 2004. Before any of the other countries could react, by that afternoon itself, I think about 30 ships, 20 aircraft, and a lot of medical aid, medical teams had gone not only to places that in India that were affected, like Port Blair in Chennai, but also to Sri Lanka, Indonesia, etc. So I think that got us a lot of attention. It got us a lot of appreciation, global appreciation. And since then, every Indian ship that sails, goes to sea, is carrying relief material in the in the event of an emergency happening anywhere, wherever it is deployed. And because of that, we are now more or less the first responder in most of the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations in the Indo Pacific region.
Right.
You name them, wherever you see an Indian naval ship is in the proximity. The Indian Navy, this has a two-pronged thing. Firstly, it's a great tool of our maritime diplomacy. And to be considered a preferred security partner in the region, I won't say net security provider at this stage. We prefer to be called a preferred security partner right now.
Right.
Most countries look to India for this kind of support. And that is why India, under the whole SAGAR doctrine sort of rubric, has been able to do a lot of capacity building, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. And what it also helps us do is get a lot of maritime domain awareness. Our ships are deployed all over the Indo-Pacific at any given time. We have what we call the multi-mission deployment of our ships. So they are there to meet any eventuality and also keep an eye on the oceans, both the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific, to ensure that there is no such situation developing which could become inimical to our maritime interests in the region. So I think it's been a very effective tool. Our HADR diplomacy, we are seen as a force for good. We are seen as a very responsible nation in upholding the rules-based order in the region. So I think as a country and as a navy, today the Indian Navy has a very respectable position in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, as one of the leading navies in the world, it has a very important role to play. And it takes that responsibility very seriously.
Absolutely. Mr. Sinha, Mr. Singh just mentioned maritime diplomacy. And indeed, Indo-Pacific has increasingly established itself as a new domain in India's diplomatic engagements. We have had the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. And in 2019, at the East Asia Summit in Bangkok, the Prime Minister also announced the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. So to what extent do regional partnerships and alliances contribute to enhancing maritime connectivity and security in the Indo-Pacific region?
Rini, it's a very good question that you have asked. The oceans do not have any borders. Unlike the land border or the airspace border, moment you get out of the territorial water, you are with the rest of the world. That is number one. The second point is that alone one country's asset cannot take care of the security, multifarious security and HADR requirements. It is tough. These days you are talking about piracy, you are talking about terrorism, transportation of terrorists, you are talking about narcotics, you are talking about human migration, and a whole lot of these dirty things are happening. And given the size, just take Indian Ocean only, I won't cover the Pacific. Indian Ocean, if you sit near the tip of India, you are looking at a radius, at a diameter of 3,000 kilometers, 1,500 kilometers on each side. So we always believe that in maritime world, if you have to ensure security of the trade, then you have to cooperate with each other. You have to come together. And for cooperating together, the navies do it best because they don't operate in the confines of any border. And you can go, you can meet at sea. Therefore, you will find any ship, Indian ship visiting any of the port in the neighboring countries, it doesn't make news because it is expected that you will come and visit because you're not breaking any rules. Try that over land. You can't do that. You can't just go into somebody's territory and you can get shot. So the maritime trade is the key of prosperity of the world. 70% of the world is water, and the maritime still remains the cheapest mode of transportation compared to air or by land. And therefore, everybody, the global commons, as we call it in the maritime world, that it belongs to the global commons. At any time, if you take roughly the 90% of the vessels which are on the sea, they're all merchant marine. They're
Right.
carrying trade from one place to another. It's only about 10% that they're washing. So therefore, you have to remain together, you have to remain friendly, you have to support each other. And for that, this maritime diplomacy that Commodore Ajay Singh talked about, it is much easier to do. Here you don't require some very, half the naval officers are by and large, they are diplomats of their own country, they're ambassadors of their country. Because wherever they go, you will find that they are welcome because they are seen as a big navy, responsible navy, as Commodore Ajay Singh said.
Right.
Yes, we are a very responsible navy. We have only helped people. We haven't used our naval power to destroy somebody. But
Absolutely.
yes, we remain prepared. Should the time come, we should be able to respond and respond very well. Rini.
Right. So we are talking about global commons and we've talked about oceans having no borders. And this brings me to my next question. Mr. Singh, in his keynote address at the 5th edition of IPRD on 15 November, the Vice President mentioned that seas are emerging as the new frontier for global contestation due to this vast economic potential that they have. So what measures can be taken to help contain the possibility of contesting claims on the seas and on the assets that they hold?
You see, I was there when the Vice President delivered his address the other day. And I think he made some very, very, very telling points which need to be pondered over. And I think this was one very telling point. It is a fact that because the focus of the world is shifting to the maritime domain, and it's going to be the seas that are going to be the source of sustenance for humankind in the next few years with land resources depleting rapidly, there is going to be a lot of contestation. The great power game is going to be played out at sea. We are talking of the Indo Pacific as now the center of gravity, the global geopolitical and geoeconomic center of gravity. The Indo Pacific, as its name suggests, is basically a maritime orientation. It's got the Indian Ocean and it talks of the Pacific Ocean. So there is no doubt that these oceans, which we call the global commons, are also going to become the scene of contestation. And therefore, it is very important that the responsible middle power and big power navies in the region take the role I was mentioning very responsibly to maintain a rules-based order, because that is very important. And what we need to understand is, and this the Prime Minister had referred to also, which you alluded to in his keynote address at the Shangrila Dialogue in 2018. He said we are not distinguishing between anybody in the South China Sea or in the Indo Pacific. We are not saying we are wits. It's for everybody. Whoever is willing to be cooperative and cooperate with us in maintaining a rules-based order is part of the Indo Pacific.
Right.
And I think one of the speakers even in the dialogue mentioned that it is no longer one person cannot shape the rules-based order. It has to be a combination of nations. The world should agree to a rules-based order. The majority should agree. And that is what we have to guard against, basically. And that we can only guard against if we have the requisite hard power to put that pressure without it becoming kinetic in nature. So, and navies are all about that, power projection, presence, showing the flag. So it's about your presence there. That is enough of a deterrent for anybody else who may have some, ideas of misadventure in the future. And that is the focus, I think, in the Indo-Pacific will be that like-minded navies will get together and build capacity for the other nations in the region so that everybody prospers. And that also, if you remember, was mentioned by the Prime Minister in his Shangrila Dialogue address, that we are looking at a common sort of prosperity for everybody. We're not about it's mine or yours, and we must use the global commons as they're meant to be used, as global commons. So I think that is a very important aspect of what the Vice President had alluded to in his address.
Right. And when we're talking about, common prosperity, and particularly with reference to the Indo-Pacific, the Vice President also mentioned that this region is faced with an explosive global scenario with many cliffhanging situations, to quote him in his words. And he also talked about the importance of an effective regulatory regime. So, Mr. Sinha, to what extent have the current set of laws and conventions that are already in place, how well have they served the global community and how effective have these been on the whole?
You're asking me, Rini?
Yes, Mr. Sinha.
Yeah, Rini, again, an extremely important question. How it has been for last, let's say, from 1982 onwards, well, it's largely been followed because it's a convention, United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Sea. There are signatories, there are some countries who have not ratified it, but there are some countries who have ratified but they are not following it. If that is also true, if you see the South China Sea's problem of expansionism, People's Republic of China going and occupying Paracel and Spratly Island, and recently you have the problems in Scarborough Shoal and St. Thomas Shoal just now. So I think that there is a need. My sense is that either we have a relook at this, have a review of the the laws of the sea,
Right.
because there's a lot of gap between the claims, historical claims made by some countries, and the legal and the political maps which have been drawn by the country.
Right.
So that gap cannot be filled by fighting. What PRC is doing, they are actually evicting people from the island, saying that it is mine. So there have been a lot of problems of this kind. You can't take out a history book and say, no, in the year of the Lord, this was mine. Therefore, you get out from here. So
Right.
free and open sea and non-expansionist approach, and sort out all problems by dialogue, not by fighting. This is exactly what our Prime Minister has been saying. I remember, in Shangrila Dialogue, which Commodore Ajay Singh was mentioning, I was in the audience at that day, and everybody was taken by surprise that he did not name any country, and he said that if you follow the rule of the rule of law, then you are part of this Indo-Pacific. Because the Chinese speakers were quite, what is Indo-Pacific, who's excluded? He said, no, it is inclusive. And that word inclusive has been included because of India's insistence. Earlier, it wasn't there. So I think that it is important to understand that laws are here to be followed. And if you find that laws have outlived, they have not outlived. I still feel that these laws are very much time-tested and they are all right. But if one country is having some problem, this must be sorted out in the United Nations, by review of one clause,
Right.
or between two countries where there is a problem. So I think that my sense is that laws are very effective, they are good, and they should be followed. If they are not being followed, then they should be named and shamed, and we should be ready that till such time these laws are amended or reviewed, this country can start claiming many more things, and it can lead to not only a contestation but to a conflict. And we must be ready for that. And this is exactly what is happening by Quad, and you got the AUKUS. All these are all manifestation of that likelihood. So that is what I would say.
Right. Now a question of a slightly different tone. Mr. Singh, India's 7,500 kilometer long coastline is no doubt a great strength, and in fact it is an enabler of its maritime prowess. But given the current scenario of global warming and climate change, which in turn is triggering a rise in sea levels and causing an increased frequency of natural disasters, this also happens to be a vulnerability. So how is this likely to impact India's maritime interests in the future?
Climate change is something that has now become irreversible. No matter how much of corrective action we may take now, what has been set in motion is not going to get reversed at least till the end of the century. And India is going to be affected quite substantially by this. There are articles which state that by the end of the century, Bombay will be 7 islands once again, as it used to be. A lot of coastline along the Laccadives is already going underwater. The Agati Island, where the airfield is already losing, I think, a few centimeters per year. So this is going to have that is just the sort of inundation happening because of the rise in sea levels. Plus the biodiversity in the region. Now, biodiversity supports marine life. And marine life in India, more than 200 million people are dependent on the sea for their living, directly or indirectly. 9 states, we have 9 coastal states and 4 union territories. So it's going to have a huge impact on our food security in the future, because fish are going to migrate the moment the biodiversity gets affected, or their source of their food source disappears. They will migrate. As waters are getting warmer, fish are actually migrating towards cooler waters. More and more extreme weather events will be seen. So far, we've been seeing most extreme weather events happening on our east coast. But now with the melting ice, the complete, the warm water tidal streams are changing. And it is predicted that from a few years from now, the west coast of India will see far more extreme weather events than the east coast of India will see. Right. So these are all going to have a tremendous impact. We are in a very, very vulnerable position, and I think India has taken a very strong stand on ensuring that we have the sustainable development goals, making sure we meet the right targets, set the right milestones. But I'm not sure the world is really doing what it needs to do. The small island developing states are at the risk of disappearing from the face of this earth. But adequate action has not been taken to address climate change. And this is going to become a big security vulnerability in the future because it's going to lead to disaffected populations. It may lead to internal, disturbance because the population is getting disaffected. And then you become prey to some inimical force coming and further sort of instigating your population to become more restive. And these are all factors which we will have to worry about, particularly along our coast and in our EEZ. Because we have a volatile coast. Our neighbors, we have fairly volatile neighbors around us who are just looking for an opportunity to sort of to exploit any vulnerability that they see in India.
Correct.
So I think we need to look at this very, very carefully and take adequate steps to mitigate, to whatever extent we can, the effects of climate change on our coastline and our maritime space. And our neighbors' maritime space also, not only ours, our maritime neighbors, because it's equally important that they are protected also from the effects of climate change.
Right. Mr. Sinha, sometime back, Mr. Singh mentioned about hard power. And again, in today's world, I think the nature of projection of hard power has also changed to some extent. The idea of war or the idea of strategic strength is also evolving. So technology is playing a far more crucial role than it has earlier. So in this context, how well equipped do you think India is in terms of its maritime security prowess, especially when it comes to naval assets or technology?
Really, we are quite ahead. We are a very powerful navy. And if you go by sheer firepower and effective power, I would say we would fall in first 4 or 5 countries in the world.
Right.
Because, our planners have been very, very thoughtful. The admirals and the senior officers who did the planning in the past, they always thought of India as an Indian Ocean country. And therefore, they looked at this area starting from the Straits of Malacca right up to Gulf of Aden, Bab-el-Mandeb, and on top to the Straits of Hormuz. So this is a big area, the 3,000 kilometers radius diameter I was talking about. They also went into shipbuilding. They also went into submarine procurement and weapon systems gradually. So we are totally self-sufficient in making our ships. And therefore, you will find that we have no shortage of ships and replacements have been worked out. And we can really seal the Indian Ocean if required. Fortunately for us, the geography has been very kind to India. We have known areas from where the ships can enter Indian Ocean or exit on both sides, on the east and west.
Right.
And therefore, protecting or monitoring those areas is one of our good security concerns, and we are very good at it. And therefore, you'll find that not many countries are going to take any cudgels with India. Indian Navy is a very strong Navy, much more powerful than any other Navy.
Absolutely.
I would say that maybe except for US Navy's presence here, which makes it the world's strongest Navy, there is no other Navy which can come to Indian Ocean and threaten our security concerns at the moment. But then we have to keep adding to our ships. We have to keep adding to our submarines, our helicopters. They're all being done. But I wish it was done a little quicker, because you do not know when is the disaster going to hit you. They don't tell you what time they're coming. So I think that we are on the right track, and we can also provide security to all our neighbors if they ask for it. We don't go on our own. We do have agreements with most of the neighbors, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Bangladesh, some extent Myanmar, Indonesia. So we have agreements with them, and we do joint patrols with them so that they are more at comfort with you. They don't look at you as a big navy, and therefore they don't feel threatened like they feel threatened by China. They don't feel threatened by India.
Thank you, Mr. Sinha. Mr. Singh, thank you. I thank both my guests for their valuable inputs today. And while talking about the Indo-Pacific, we have touched a number of different aspects ranging from the strategic to the geopolitical and the geo-economic, and we have a better understanding of what the Indo-Pacific region means for the world and what India's initiatives in the region mean for its neighbors and for the global community at large. That's it for this edition of Perspective. Thank you for watching.